few months ago, I went hiking in the mountains with a friend. We live in a remote area of western Maryland, and that day we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop, one we'd hiked plenty of times before. It was a quiet, familiar trail, and we had reached a summit where we decided to take a break. There was a small park there, a few benches, and a parking lot. The view was incredible, but something in the air felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. As I sat there, I noticed a man walking around the parking lot. He was alone, wandering aimlessly and staring at the ground. He looked out of place. For starters, he wasn't dressed for hiking. He had on jeans and a button-down shirt. No pack, no boots. Just regular clothes, like he'd taken a wrong turn from wherever he came from. His presence was strange, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just lost. After a while, we decided to continue. The last stretch of the trail led downhill toward the park headquarters. It was a narrow path, cut into the side of the mountain, so we had to walk single file. I was in front, chatting with my friend, when I glanced back to check on her. That's when I saw him again. The man from the parking lot. He was right behind her, walking much too close for comfort. My stomach dropped. It didn't make sense. Why was he here, and why was he following us? He didn't have any gear, no water, no sign he'd been hiking at all. His eyes, something about them was unsettling. They were fixed on the trail, almost like he was in some kind of trance. We kept walking, but his presence weighed on me. He was still right there, trailing us at an uncomfortable distance. I needed to find a way to slow things down, maybe even make him pass us. I thought that if I could create a reason to stop, it would allow him to go ahead. So I told my friend I needed to tie my shoe, hoping that would give him a chance to move on. My friend seemed to understand what I was doing and stepped aside with me, creating a buffer between the two of us and him. As he passed, I noticed the stick in his hand. He didn't say a word. His silence, combined with the way he carried that stick, made me feel uneasy. We waited a few moments, hoping he would continue down the trail, but instead of keeping his pace, he slowed down. I watched him closely. When he reached a point where the trail curved, he turned and stared back at us. At that moment, I knew we couldn't keep going in the same direction. Something about the way he moved, how he had waited for us to catch up, set off alarm bells in my head. Without hesitation, I motioned to my friend, and we turned back. We decided to retrace our steps, heading back toward the summit and the safety of the parking lot. It seemed like the best option, to get back to where there were other people. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. Then as I glanced back, I saw him again. He was following us, climbing the trail the same way we had come. Panic began to rise in me, and I urged my friend to move faster. We picked up the pace without making it too obvious, walking as quickly as we could until we reached the summit again. The moment we got back to the parking lot, we stopped and tried to catch our breath. It felt safer there, with more people around. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I kept looking back toward the trail, waiting for him to appear again. He didn't. Minutes passed, then 20. And there was no sign of him. I tried to calm myself, telling myself he must have continued down the trail, but the idea that he could still be waiting somewhere on the path, watching us, wouldn't leave my mind. Eventually, a couple came up from the direction we had just fled. They were hiking the loop in the opposite direction. I decided to ask if they had seen anyone on the trail, hoping they would say no, that he had disappeared. The woman described seeing a man sitting on a rock halfway down the trail. I felt a chill run through me. That matched him perfectly. As I processed what she said, my mind raced. Could it be just a coincidence? Maybe he was just resting. Or maybe he wasn't following us at all. But then, the husband added something that made my heart skip a beat. He mentioned that the man had been carving something into the stick with a knife. My instincts had been right all along. This wasn't just some innocent hiker. I knew then that I needed to take this seriously. I couldn't risk underestimating the situation. We called a ranger, explaining what had happened, and the couple kindly offered to walk with us back to our car. I was grateful for their presence. Having them with us made me feel a little more secure, but I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Every sound in the woods, every crunch of leaves sent a wave of fear through me. We reached the parking lot without any more signs of him. The rangers arrived and searched the trail, but they didn't find him. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he was planning, but the thought of what could have happened still haunts me. I'm just glad I trusted my gut that day. Whatever he had in mind, I didn't want to find out. Three years ago, when I turned 30, my boyfriend and I decided to sell everything we owned and hit the road. We had been planning it for years, just us, his old Trailblazer, and a desire to explore the US and Canada. We weren't exactly off the grid, but we lived simply. Between us, we had a prepaid phone and my old MacBook, which I used for freelance writing gigs. The goal was to live without debt and keep our bills to a minimum, so we avoided cities unless necessary. Last summer, we decided to head to Arkansas for some backcountry hiking. It wasn't a state you heard much about from hikers, but we'd read that the natural landscape was beautiful, and it turned out to be true. The park we chose had lax rules, no permits required, and no mandatory check-ins. Perfect for us. We planned a 6-day hike, 3 days in, 3 days out. On the first day, as the sun started to dip, we were preparing to move off the trail to set up camp. We usually went about half a mile off the main path to find a secluded spot. As we were walking, we stumbled upon a small green tent, nearly camouflaged in the brush. We hadn't seen or heard anyone all day, so it was a surprise to see it there. Some hikers like their privacy, others are more social. We tended to be more of the social type, happy to share stories or even a meal with fellow hikers. My boyfriend called out a greeting to let the person know we were nearby. No response. The tent stayed zipped up, silent. We figured whoever it was either wasn't around or didn't want company. So we moved on, found our own spot, and set up camp. The rest of the night passed uneventfully. By the time day 5 rolled around, we had almost forgotten about the green tent. But as we made our way back along the trail, there it was again, right where we'd seen it before. This time, though, the flap was open. My boyfriend called out again. Nothing. He was curious, maybe even concerned. I wasn't so eager. I had heard enough stories from other hikers about people who wanted their privacy and didn't take kindly to strangers snooping around. But he insisted we check it out, reasoning that maybe someone was hurt or in trouble. As we got closer, a foul smell hit me, thick and rotten. My stomach twisted. My boyfriend turned to me and asked, "What if we find a dead body?" The idea chilled me. I had never seen a dead body before, and I didn't want to start now. We kept walking, drawn toward the smell despite the dread gnawing at me. The closer we got, the worse it became. What I imagined was bad enough, a camper who'd met some kind of tragic end. But when we reached the tent, what we found was far worse. Outside the tent, there were the legs of a deer, all 4 of them, swarming with flies. They weren't just cut off. They looked like they'd been torn apart. Blood and dirt were smeared around the area. Inside the tent, the scene grew more grotesque. The deer's body and head lay swaddled in a blue fleece blanket, soaked in blood at the edges where the legs had once been. The tail was gone, and the lower part of the body was twisted unnaturally. There was dried blood around the animal's mouth and rear, like something had been done to it, something I couldn't even let my mind fully process. I didn't want to look anymore, but it was like I was paralyzed. The smell was overpowering, making it hard to breathe. Near the deer's body was an empty bottle of baby oil and a filthy, stained kitchen towel. Nothing else. It didn't make sense, none of it did, but I didn't need to understand it. I just knew we had to get out of there. My boyfriend stood frozen for a moment, then muttered, "What the hell?" That was all either of us could say. I grabbed his arm and we both bolted, running back to the trail, our hearts racing. We didn't stop running until the sky started to darken and we had no choice but to set up camp for the night. We didn't go far off the trail this time, and we didn't build a fire. We just sat there, whispering about what we had seen, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to it, not really. Every noise in the woods set us on edge. Every snap of a twig had us convinced that whoever, or whatever, had done that to the deer was out there, hunting us down. We barely slept. I spent the whole night imagining footsteps approaching, a shadow moving through the trees. We packed up as soon as the sun began to rise and headed straight for the ranger station. We had to tell someone about what we'd found. The ranger, a young guy around our age, listened to our story, looking more and more unsettled as we went on. He asked some basic questions like where exactly we'd seen the tent and whether we could tell how the deer had been killed. We couldn't give him much more detail. Neither of us had been interested in investigating further. We just wanted to get out of there. That trip changed us. We still hike, but never for more than a few days at a time, and we've stopped being so eager to greet other campers. We keep our distance now, always aware of what might be lurking out there, just beyond the trail. It had been raining steadily all week, and I figured it was the perfect time to take my son out mushroom hunting. He's 14 and always up for a bit of adventure, so we decided to head out over the weekend. We usually go a little earlier in the day, but time slipped away from us, and before we knew it, the sun was starting to sink low on the horizon. The plan was simple: a quick hike to the river and back, hoping to find some turkey tails or chanterelles. We must have missed a turn somewhere, because instead of sticking to the familiar trail, we found ourselves wandering through a big, open field. No big deal, I thought. The trail would loop around and connect back to the main path that led down to the river. We kept moving, and as we got closer to the main trail, I noticed something. The last group of hikers had already left, and it was just me and my son now. The woods were quiet. Then out of nowhere, a man appeared from one of the narrow side trails. He stepped out of the trees with a dog at his side. There was something off about him immediately. The way he stared at us, unblinking, his eyes fixed on us as we got closer. His dog, a small beagle mix, stood still, completely alert. I tried to act casual, but the air had shifted. The guy started waving at us, a slow, awkward motion that felt wrong, somehow. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made my skin crawl. I didn't want to be rude, so I gave a weak wave back, not really sure what else to do. My instincts were screaming that something wasn't right, so I quietly told my son to slow down. I didn't want to meet this guy at the trail junction ahead. We dawdled a bit, pretending to examine some plants, hoping the man would get far enough ahead that we wouldn't run into him again. Eventually, he turned and walked down the path, the same direction we were headed. I kept an eye on him as he moved down the trail, which curved to the right, disappearing behind a line of trees. A nagging thought crept into my mind. What if he was waiting for us around that corner? The woods were starting to feel smaller, the shadows longer. Sure enough, as we approached the junction where the trail split, there he was. He stood just off the path to the left, not far from the parking lot. To the right was the trail leading down to the river. He wasn't moving, just standing there staring at us. His dog sat obediently at his feet, as still as a statue. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the staring. It was the way he held himself, motionless, almost as if he was waiting for something. I nudged my son and we silently agreed to keep a wide berth, veering to the right, toward the river. I could feel my pulse quicken as we passed him. My son and I exchanged a few nervous glances, each of us thinking the same thing. He didn't look fast. If it came down to it, we could outrun him. But that didn't make the situation any less unnerving. As we got closer, I forced myself to ask if he was okay, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. He just stood there, staring. His greasy hair stuck to his forehead, and those tiny round glasses perched on his nose seemed to magnify the emptiness in his eyes. He was dressed in a faded blue windbreaker and long plaid shorts, and there was something off about the whole picture. I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. I kept walking, not daring to break stride. I pulled out my phone, holding it at an angle where I could see him in the screen's reflection as we walked away. He didn't follow, but I watched as he slowly shifted his body to keep us in his line of sight. No words, no movement, just that same dead stare. We didn't stop until we were a good distance down the trail. My son was quiet, but I could tell he was as unsettled as I was. We walked in silence for a while, the trees closing in around us as the light continued to fade. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there just watching. On our way back, I kept my guard up, scanning the trail for any sign of him. But by the time we reached the junction again, he was gone. The parking lot was empty, and the path was clear. Even though we didn't see him again, the encounter stayed with me. There was something about the way he appeared out of the woods, the way he stared without saying a word, that sent chills down my spine. It felt like we had crossed paths with something or someone that didn't quite fit in the world around us. As we finally made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the thought, whoever or whatever that man was, I hope I never run into him again. A few months ago, I was feeling restless at home and decided to go for a hike. I don't hike much, but it seemed like a good way to spend the last hour of daylight. I grabbed my water bottle, put on my shoes, and drove up to the mountains. There are a lot of hiking trails near where I live. Usually I stay near the base of the mountain, where most people go. But this time I wanted to try something different. A friend had told me about a trail further up the mountain, so I decided to check it out. When I got there, I noticed there were no cars parked along the road. It was quiet, but I didn't think much of it since it was getting late. I started down the trail, heading down a steep hill that led to a dry riverbed. Climbing up the other side was tough, but after that, the trail flattened out. As I walked, I saw a coyote in the distance, along with some rabbits hopping around. A little further along the trail, I came across a large fallen tree lying across the dry riverbed. It looked like a good place to take a break, so I climbed on it, snapped a few pictures, and rested for about 10 minutes. After that, I continued on the trail. The sun was setting fast, and the woods were getting darker. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound behind me. It wasn't small like a rabbit or squirrel. It sounded bigger. I stopped and listened, but everything went silent. I couldn't see anything behind me, but I felt uneasy. I decided it was time to head back to my car. I reached the fallen tree again and stopped to tie my shoe. When I glanced behind me, I saw someone. They were far away, dressed all in black, with their hood up. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just another hiker. But something felt off. It was getting darker, and I picked up my pace. After walking a little further, I looked back again. The person was closer now. They weren't running, but somehow they were catching up to me. I started to feel nervous and walked faster. When I reached a bend in the trail, I couldn't see them anymore. But after a few minutes, they were behind me again, much closer this time, only about 50 feet away. My heart started racing. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I started running. I didn't stop to check if they were following. I just kept going. The path was uneven and full of rocks, making it hard to run, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to my car. When I finally reached the bottom of the hill near the trailhead, I turned around. The person was still there. This time, I saw them stop running as soon as they saw me looking. It was like they wanted to pretend they weren't chasing me. I didn't wait to find out what they were planning. I bolted toward my car, legs burning, and my heart pounding. I jumped in the car, started the engine, and reversed onto the road. As I did, I saw the person step out from the trail. Their hood had fallen back, revealing a pale face and blank eyes. They were breathing heavily and they were holding something, but it was too dark to see what it was. I didn't stick around to find out. I floored the gas and drove away as fast as I could. It was over a decade ago when I was about 8, and my family took a trip to visit relatives in rural Victoria, Australia. My mom's side of the family lived out on a farm surrounded by endless fields and a thick wooded area. It was one of those places where you could go hours without seeing another person, with only the sound of birds and the occasional rustling in the trees to keep you company. I loved it. We were staying at my grandparents' house. It was the kind of place that felt like a world of its own, miles away from the nearest town. My mom was an avid bird watcher, so she often took the chance to wander into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of some rare species. One afternoon, she decided to head out again, this time with me and my brother's girlfriend, Lisa. I was eager to tag along. I loved exploring, and the idea of wandering through the forest with them sounded exciting. After about 10 minutes of walking along a dirt path, we came across a group of bikers having a barbecue. They were camped out near the edge of the woods, their motorcycles lined up next to a small fire pit. My mom exchanged a polite greeting with one of the bikers as we passed by, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. One of them mentioned something about people hunting in the area, advising us to watch out for dogs. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, so we continued on our way. Not long after, I spotted an old barn off in the distance. Curiosity got the better of me, and without a word to my mom or Lisa, I veered off the path and headed toward it. The barn was run down, the kind of place that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Outside were 3 large dogs, Rottweilers, chained up and barking furiously as I got closer. I figured they were just there to guard the property, though something about the scene felt off. As I approached, the foul stench of something rotten hit me. There was an old mattress lying outside the barn, stained with something dark and grimy. It reeked, the kind of smell that makes your stomach turn even from a few feet away. I was about to head back when a man stepped out from the barn. He was tall, much taller than anyone I'd ever seen before, and dressed in a dusty blue pinstriped suit that didn't match the setting at all. On top of that, he wore a large old-fashioned top hat, like something out of a circus. His face was flushed, his beard scraggly and wild, and he had this strange, unsettling smile as he walked toward me. I remember standing there frozen as he approached. There was something about him that felt wrong. I couldn't place it, but every instinct told me I shouldn't be there. He stopped a few feet from me and asked if I liked dogs. I nodded. His smile widened, and he motioned toward the barn, asking if I wanted to come inside to see more dogs and take a picture with them. I shook my head, suddenly feeling uneasy. I mumbled something about needing to get back to my mom. But before I could turn to leave, he grabbed my arm. Lightly, but firm enough that I couldn't pull away. His grip tightened, and he repeated that it would only take a second. Then I heard my mom's voice, sharp and demanding. She was calling out to the man, asking him what he thought he was doing. I hadn't even noticed her approaching. The man didn't say a word. He just stood there, still holding my arm, staring at her with that same blank expression. My mom hurried over and grabbed me, pulling me away from him. She didn't ask twice. We started walking quickly back toward the path. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and after a few minutes I saw him again. He was following us. My heart raced as I tugged on my mom's sleeve, whispering that the man was behind us. She turned around, saw him too, and her pace quickened. We were practically jogging by now, and I could feel the tension rising. He wasn't walking anymore, he was speeding up, closing the distance. That's when my mom grabbed my arm and started running, dragging me along with her. We didn't stop. I remember her gasping for breath, calling for help, but we were alone, miles away from anyone who could hear us. Out of nowhere, he was on us. I felt his hand grab my leg, pulling me back. Before I even knew what was happening, she threw herself at him, clawing at his face, trying to pull him off me. He shoved her to the ground, but my mom didn't hesitate. She kicked him hard and yanking me up in the same motion. We didn't look back as we sprinted toward the edge of the forest. For a brief moment, I thought we'd lost him. My legs burned and my chest felt like it was about to explode, but we couldn't stop. When I dared to glance behind us again, I saw him. He had reappeared from the brush, running toward us at full speed. My mom pushed me forward, practically carrying me as we made our way back to the bikers' camp. As we broke through the tree line, my mom shouted for help, her voice desperate and panicked. 2 of the bikers emerged from the trees, and my mom pointed at the man, yelling that he had tried to kidnap me. The man didn't even hesitate. As soon as he saw the bikers, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the woods. One of the bikers took off after him, but the man had too much of a head start. We never saw him again. The bikers were kind, helping us get back to town and even giving us a ride to the local police station. I don't remember much after that. The adrenaline, the fear, it all blurred together. But I never forgot the man in the suit, the strange top hat, and the cold vacant stare as he tried to lead me away into the barn. And to this day, I hope I never meet him again.